I am really honored and excited to introduce Dan Bricklin. He's the founder and president of Software Garden, Inc. It's a small consulting firm and software application developer. But as we've been talking throughout the day, he's had many accomplishments, and one huge one that affects us all. Anybody that ever has anything to do with a spreadsheet. He conceived and created Visicalc, pioneering electric spreadsheet, while he was a student at Harvard Business School. So Dan's going to come on up, and he's going to speak about the good old days. Take it away, Dan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so as we all know, the theme of this year's festival is startups that matter. Startups that change the world, and startups whose stories we'll still want to hear in 30 years. Visicalc was 1979, that's about 30 years ago. You never know who will create a major breakthrough in their field or where it will come from. You know, right here in Montreal, back in 1979, that was right after we shipped Visicalc for the first time, two journalists were playing a game of Scrabble, and they wondered if they could do better with the game. They made up the basics of their own game right then and there, but then it took them a few years, and they had a lot of hard work. They raised $40,000 in seed money from friends and others, and then they came out with a game called Trivial Pursuit. How many have heard of Trivial Pursuit? Yep. It was a huge hit, sold on the order of 100 million copies. That's cardboard. At a lot of that, we're talking about over $1 billion. Those were two journalists. Now, as I worked on this talk last week, let's see, let's go over here. There we go. When I worked on this talk last week, I was sitting at my desk, and this is sort of the view that I had. And I learned recently that when I look out that window and I see that window across the street and the house across the street, it turns out that 120 years ago, Reverend Francis Bellamy sat in that very room. And he was looking at our house was going to be built a few years later, so he probably just saw trees. And his task was to write a salute to the flag of the United States of America. It was to be used in celebrations in the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus. In that room, he wrote what we in the United States call the Pledge of Allegiance, which is still taught to school children to this day. Now, that's a little humbling to sit there writing your stuff, knowing that was written. And, you know, I know this talk may end up on YouTube or something, but I don't think it's going to last very long, and even my kids aren't going to be thinking about it next year. But I hope you get the point. Innovation that lasts is happening everywhere and at all times, and it could be you who brings it about. Now let me set the stage for the Visicalc story. Looking back today, especially for all of you who probably weren't even born or out of diapers in those days, back in the 70s when we did this stuff, it's hard to remember how strange you'd be considered in the 1970s if you thought that a regular person would have their own computer. This is a picture of the first piece of computer hardware that I ever saw in person. It's a punch card sorter that was used as a database system for the subscriptions to a newspaper, a small newspaper that my grandfather was the editor of. A few years later, when I was in 7th grade, I saw it back in like late 1950s. I used my grandfather's portable typewriter to learn to type. This is me when I was 15. And there's my dad. My dad and his dad ran a small business, a printing business. They were printers. This is, I found, is one of his spreadsheets. This is how spreadsheets were done. You did it by hand, you did it in columns and rows and stuff like that, formatted it real nice. You have colors and stuff and fonts, I guess, if you have the right type of pens. That's how we used to do it. In 1969, the fall of '69, I went off to college at MIT. That's in Cambridge, Mass. And it was there that I met my long-term friend, now lifelong friend, Bob Frankston. He's the one on your left. And Bob and I worked on the Multics project. Anybody here know about Multics? Whoa, that's great. Multics was precursor to what we now know as Unix and Linux. And we were there on the 5th floor in Tech Square, and the Artificial Intelligence Lab was up on the top. I worked on, among other things, some versions of BASIC. I implemented the APL programming language twice, worked on some Lisp. These are interactive computer systems for doing numbers and stuff like that. When I graduated, I went off to Digital Equipment Corporation, may it rest in peace, which was the largest manufacturer of mini computers in the world. This was in 1973 or so, and then I worked on computerized typesetting, and I worked on word processing. One of the first word processing systems was the WPS-8 system that they had. I was project leader. This is what it looked like. We had a terminal. There was a desk that had a mini computer inside of it, and a daisy wheel printer. The thing cost like an expensive car, and that was a cheap, inexpensive word processor, an early one. I was exposed to typesetting systems like this unusual machine, the Harris 2200, which was actually a page layout machine. This was very innovative, where you could put pieces of text and stuff around and make display ads when I worked on computerized newspaper typesetting. Now, Bob and I wanted to form a business together, and I figured I really liked learning about computers at MIT. I should learn about business. And I got into Harvard Business School. In those days, it was a little easier. And there I was. This is the fall of 1977. And there were like 90 of us in the class, and I was sitting there. This is from my yearbook. We were doing a case on pocket calculators, and I like bringing in old stuff for history. So the old days were one of the old mechanical calculators. The guy who lent it to me is one of the inventors of the internet. He did the slash between TCP and IP. That is real important if you understand that they broke apart the two of those. He didn't make up the slash. He wrote that they should be separate. TCP and IP should be separate. If you've never been to business school getting an MBA, these are the type of courses you take. Corporate financial management, business logistics, advertising, all sorts of stuff about all of business. That's what you learn about. At Harvard, they do the case method. In the case method, we have cases, 3 of them every night. Anywhere from 5 to 50 pages, they were typed up in those days. And it's a business situation with exhibits. And the exhibits look like this. This is what I was doing every night for hours, looking up, staring at, trying to make sense of things that look like this. This is how notice, this isn't just rows and columns of a database. This is juxtaposing text and numbers in meaningful ways. So this is what I was seeing. We had a time-sharing system for if we needed to use computers for stuff. There is me from my yearbook. I had hair down to here when I went to Harvard. This is what it looked like. If you used, they had canned programs you could use. Notice it says print spreadsheet. Here's my homework. So you can see what was going on in my head. I was living through this. On the back of a piece of spreadsheet paper, I would do my homework. The name of the student newsletter was The Spreadsheet. We were using our calculator. Everything was calculators. I was after the slide rule days, but in the calculator days. And we got so close to our calculators that for Halloween, I dressed up as a calculator. Inside, I was integrated circuit man. So, you do your homework, and you've run the numbers, and you come into class, and invariably you got one of them wrong, and all your other numbers are wrong. So when you're 90 of you sitting in class in each of the sections, and you sit in the same class for the first year every day, I was sitting down there, and the professor speaks over. You get to daydream a lot, okay? And I would see he'd erase something on the board, and try a new number. Louis, what value should we use at this? And Louis had the numbers, though I found out later Louis made them up. But he had all the numbers, and I imagined, whoa, if only I had a magic blackboard where I could erase a number, put a new one in, and it would recalculate. It would be like word processing does word wrap. If only it could do, word processing with numbers, taking the background that I had in interactive computer systems, in word processing and interpreted computer languages. Thought, whoa, you know, I have my calculator. This is my calculator. This is the cheap one. I couldn't afford an HP one. And imagine it had a ball on the bottom of it, like a mouse, okay? Because I had actually seen a computer mouse in those days. They weren't generally available, but I had seen it in a research thing, seen an Alto. And there were enough keys for the characters and for numbers and stuff like that, and for operators. And imagine I had a head-up display, like in a fighter plane, which is what I thought about. Nowadays, we just think of Google Glasses, right? You know, but we were thinking of other stuff. And if only you could type numbers in and you could circle it and push the sum button and say, yes, 10% would be okay in a negotiation. This is what I was thinking about. I was thinking about doing this. Eventually, I got more practical into doing this. I actually did a prototype of it. A little bit I had to think of. The idea of columns and rows came for trying to figure out how to make that work on the time-sharing system that they had at Harvard. So the summer of 1978, between the first and second year of Harvard Business School, I had to decide what to do afterwards. And I decided, I was out on Martha's Vineyard riding on my bicycle. And that summer I decided, you know, I'm not going to be an investment banker. I'm going to have a little startup, and I'm going to take this idea, put it on some tiny computer, small computer, and pedal it out on 128. That's the beltway around Boston. And because I think this is a good idea. That's what I'm going to do. That's where I made that fateful decision. Well, so that fall, I got together with a person who had just graduated from Harvard Business School. The year before, I got introduced to him by a professor who told me not to do Visicalc. But he said, this guy will tell me why I should. Well, this other guy, Dan Filestra, had a startup, which he had been doing for about a year or so, that was selling personal computer software. He was selling micro chess. It came on a cassette tape that would let you play chess on a TRS-80 or an Apple II. So I got together with Dan, and I borrowed from him an Apple II and did a prototype of my idea of electronic spreadsheet. He, being an MBA, what a great idea. Let's do a business. So my friend Bob Frankston and I got together with him. Oops, wrong button. There we go. And we came up with a deal where they would be the publisher, personal software, as their model was, they would be a publisher, and we would be an author. Bob and I founded Software Arts. We would be the publisher of this application. Now, I have a lot more time to work in class and stuff like that, and I take this as the back of a piece of spreadsheet paper. I would have to refine, what is it we're actually building? This is the state diagram that I actually drew about, well, it should have this feature. This has features we never implemented. You always think, well, this is where it's going to go, but we actually had to make it realistic. And this is my design, and I rented a typewriter. We couldn't afford to rent a word processing system. And made a reference card of, this is the definition. So I had my prototype, the definition of it, I typed this up, and my friend Bob, he lived in Arlington and worked up in his attic, in the rented place he had, and he used time sharing, where you rent time on a computer at a distance through a terminal, and we actually used a Multic system. It's cheaper at night, so Bob would work at night and sleep during the day. I would come back from class in the afternoon, help him look for bugs and stuff, figure out what to do with the company, give him new features, and then I would go off to do my homework. This is a picture of the attic, an actual picture at the time. You can see the modem, the acoustic coupler for the modem over there, the Apple II and stuff like that. This is where we developed Visicalc. This is the early part of 1979. There's me with Bob's father. There's some of the code. It was written in assembly language. This is an early screenshot. Notice it doesn't have any trailing zeros because that code wasn't working. I kept refining the definition. You can see the correcto tape and stuff like that. And here's a complicated example with the items loaded. You know, I'm trying to figure out how the documentation is going to be done. This was one of the largest manufacturers of pre-packaged personal computing software in the world, personal software. They were the 3 rooms in Dan Filestra's apartment up in the upper left, a few blocks from Harvard Business School. They eventually moved to California, but that was what the industry was like. In the May of 1979 issue, came out in April, of Byte magazine, they ran a teaser ad. It was still secret. Our product was secret. Visicalc, how did you ever do without it? And in that same issue, Radio Shack had over 50% of the personal computer business shipping $105 million worth of equipment. Apple shipped 20,000 systems valued at a whole $30 million, and IBM shipped 5,000 units. That's what the industry was like in those days. We moved to commercial quarters, down in the basement. Now this is between, it later became a massage parlor and stuff, and it's between Harvard and MIT in Central Square. Bob and I, rather than pay money for time sharing, we mortgaged our souls and paid, I think we had to borrow like $50,000 and bought a time sharing system of our own, a mini computer, a prime mini computer. Our life savings and our future life savings, because it's personal guarantees and all that, are in this machine. Bob wrote the assembler, and he wrote the linker, and I wrote the editor and the accounting system, and we started working, and we started finishing the product. Now, we're below ground. When it rains, if you don't remember to turn the valve on the toilet, it backs up. Water pouring out when you forget. Computer behind me, life savings and future life savings, $70,000 computer. Not something you're going to want to, by the way, these are real Polaroids. These are not Instagrams. There I am with a wet vac, vacuuming it up. That's what it's like. Is this what a startup is like? Is it any different back in '79? No. We hired employees. We ate our own dog food by using our own product to help borrow money and stuff. In May of 1979, we announced it at the West Coast Computer Fair, privately under non-disclosure to the press. And then in June of 1979, we're going to announce it to the public at the National Computer Conference in New York City. So to have a handout, my father, the printer, helped me turn my reference card into a real reference card. And this was a handout that we had at the National Computer Conference. Now, big computers were in the Coliseum. The small personal computers, that those funny things, at the Personal Computer Festival in the basement of the Hilton, okay? But this appeared in the New York Times. Page B1, that's the major, if you remember paper, that's an important one. A layman's trip into the mega land of computers, a humorous article. Haha, even as the believers gather, the painters in the Coliseum sign room are adding to the pantheon, carefully lettering Visicalc in giant black on yellow. All hail Visicalc, haha, mail shop. Now, he didn't know anything about what Visicalc was about, but we got to say, all hail Visicalc, New York Times. Okay. Now, you take what you can get. This was the last mention explaining anything about the personal computer spreadsheet for about 2 years in a major business publication. They didn't get it, but some people did. This was the Morgan Stanley Electronics letter. Ben Rosen wrote, Visicalc, breaking the personal computer software bottleneck, ending with, so who knows? Visicalc could someday become the software tail that wags and sells the personal computer dog. July 1979. Ben went on to become a venture capitalist, Seven Rosen you may have heard of, and they were the major funders behind Compaq Computer and Lotus Development Corporation. Ben was a visionary, is a visionary. October '79, the first Visicalc. We actually had one ready to ship. We were starting to ship them. This is what the screen would look like. It was a physical product. It came in a vinyl binder. Inside the reference card, where lots of people got to learn about it, and the diskette and documentation. To put this in perspective, November 1979, when we were starting to ship, that is the entire ARPANET. That's the entire internet, okay? There's, MIT up there, National Security Administration over there, Stanford. That's where we were. However, the spreadsheet eventually caught on. There were people who figured out about it. We started getting competition. Eventually, like the 40th spreadsheet was Lotus 123, which was very successful, and then Excel, which became successful. This is from a retrospective that Apple did in 1987. This is what it looked like when it came out. And they wrote that Visicalc was a catalyst to their success. And let me show you this. This is 1996 on Japanese public television.
There have been two real explosions that have propelled the industry forward. The first one really happened in 1977, and it was the spreadsheet. I remember when Dan Filestra, who ran the company that marketed the first spreadsheet, walked into my office at Apple one day and pulled out this disk from this vest pocket and said, I have this incredible new program. I call it a visual calculator, and it became Visicalc. And that's what really propelled the Apple II to the success it achieved.
Now, it was like 15 years later. Steve got the year wrong. It was 1979, but this is a very special video to me to see him remembering that. Okay, so became successful on the 20th anniversary of announcing Visicalc. It was my reunion at Harvard Business School. And they had a little ceremony in that room, Aldridge 108, where I sat and came up with the ideas. And they put a plaque up. In this room in 1978, Dan Bricklin, MBA 79, conceived of the first spreadsheet program, Visicalc, original killer app of the information age, forever changed how people use computers in business. And you can see one of the drawings that I had done on my reference card. Now, why did they put that in that room? Which I hear people come and they kiss it before they take tests. Why do they put that in there? There aren't plaques inside. Their plaques are on the outside. To say that somebody just like you was sitting right here and came up with an idea to change the world, and he ran with it and did it. You too can do that. It's a thing to be inspiring. What have I done since? Lots of stuff. Most recently, I have an application for the Apple iPad called Note Taker HD. It lets you take notes, handwritten notes. You write big on the bottom, and it shrinks it to the top, and it organizes them and stuff like that. It's used by a lot of students to take notes. It's used by business people to mark up PDFs and stuff like that. But one of the major uses apparently is medical students take all their notes in medical school on this app because it's good for that. To me, this is people who will matter to me as I get older. This is an app that matters to them. It's Note Taker HD. Now, I go back to Martha's Vineyard periodically and ride bike on that path, and that's what it looks like. And I was there this year knowing I would be speaking to you guys. And as I was riding my bike, I said, what was I feeling when I made that decision? That decision to go and change my life and make the career decision to do a startup. And as I rode bike into the wind, really into the wind, I got that feeling of freedom that you have on a bicycle, that feeling of agility, the feeling of being on your own. Now, you're very exposed because you're on minimal. I mean, the bike is very minimal, very exposed. I have scars to prove I've fallen off a bike when I was a teenager. And if you remember the picture of my family, my brother was he had broken his arm in a bike accident. So I knew, it's not the safest of things. But it's so exhilarating, and it makes you feel like you can make it happen yourself. That was the feeling that I remember I had back then when I made that decision that felt so good. So if you're trying to decide you really want to do this startup thing, you're in this wonderful place, Montreal, where you can do what I did last time I was here in Montreal, rented a bike, and went riding on the canal bike path. And see how you feel about that. How do you like that feeling? Do you like being out, on your own like that, or would you rather be driven in a limo by somebody else? If you're like me and you choose the bike, ride it to somewhere that matters. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, thank you. In order to fit this into the time allotted, because they wanted me to take questions. I still have another 5 minutes or so to take questions. I had to cut a whole lot of stuff out about how I made the technical decisions and all that. A lot of it's up on my website. If you go to bricklin.com, go to the history site, the history section, you can read a little more of what I cut out and the millions of slides that I cut out. But I'm here to take questions, and afterwards, I'll be out in I think I'm going to go out to the Which one? The no, it's a teenager one. Oh, that's, thanks. Not the grant, no. To, what? The mentor, or was it?
Whichever one you want.
Yeah, sometimes the mentor one, I'll be out there. Okay?
Who's got questions?
So anybody got questions? Yes.
Question. How was your family reaction when you
How?
decided to create a
Oh, how was the family reaction? Well, first of all, in order to be able to buy that computer, I needed some down payment, okay, to buy that expensive. My parents helped with some of that, and and knew about the personal gain. I mean, I knew that they were backing in terms of that. My father ran his own business. My father-in-law ran his own business. I came from entrepreneurs, so to them it felt okay. Plus, that's my wife. Well, we we got married right a week after Visicalc shipped, and thank God we had between us 4 credit cards and all the money we got and we were able to live off of that for the next few months, which was pretty cool. So yeah, I had a very supportive family, and that is a real important help through the ups and the downs that you're going to go through. Your family is extremely important to you. So you've got a new family if they don't support, No, find friends, find people who will be supportive. It's when you have the bad, I didn't get into all the bad times. My full talk has, and I don't put it on the website, but we had, we've been up and down over the years. It's, so you need that support.
Any other questions? I can't believe it.
Yes, there's, yes.
What was the hardest thing and how did you solve it?
What was the hardest thing and how did you solve it?
That was the hardest thing. Well, I mean, the hardest thing is things like when you do big layoffs and how you solve it, you just get through it, our publisher sued us at one point for various, it's a business reason and all. It took both the companies down, cost me untold amount of money because we were about to sell our company. We were at 2 days from announcing a merger in cash. And then having to then lay off all sorts of people. That was really tough. I mean, somebody on their birthday who brings their kid in, and then you have to bring them in. They should bring your kid. No, stay out there while we talk to you. Those are some of the hardest things, the ups and downs. And you just get through it with your... One of the slides that I use is when I was coming back to do this layoff, I was taking a red eye back from trying to do marketing and stuff like that. And I came home from the red eye, and there are people there at 7 in the morning, and there's my wife, kid, and whatever, and they're at 7 in the morning to root me on with the Celtics hat, because the Celtics had just come back from being down in the playoffs or something, to root me on for it. That's how I got through.
Dan, we got a question over here from Phil.
Hi, Dan.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That's really inspiring. I love the stories, the videos, the pictures. It strikes me that when I listen to your talk and how you came up with the idea, that it came about because there was a certain amount of laziness, that you hated the idea of having to redo all those numbers. Would it be fair to say that your inspiration came from laziness?
Yes. That's right. I had a math teacher when I was in, I guess it was 8th grade, doing algebra, whose thing was, don't do today what you can put off till tomorrow, because tomorrow you won't have to do it. That was about, factoring and stuff like that. And yeah, you saw the mistakes. I mean, it was my mistakes, and I didn't like to. I would spend hours and forever programming something to save myself a little bit of time. And, that's just the way it goes.
Do all your inspirations come from laziness, or there are other places that you find your inspiration?
Well, the note-taking stuff, that came from, it's not laziness. It's like if you're interacting with somebody, the first thing I did was called Note Taker just for the iPhone. And somebody says, oh, my phone number is da-da-da-da-da-da. You can't type that in and get it correct on an iPhone that well, because if you hit a 4 instead of a 5, you won't know it, and you're looking at them. But you can scribble with your finger, and a 4 and a 5 look quite different. So that was a little more social. And back to one of the speeches this morning about you have to live in the real world.
Fantastic. I love the diagrams that you show of the notes that you took back then. I look forward in 20, 30 years to looking at the notes of Note Taker and,
Yeah.
and hearing those stories.
Well,
Thank you very
thanks.
much, Dan.
Questions over here? I'm getting my workout. This is good.
And I got better videos, but I don't have time to show them. Oh, no.
If you were alone riding your bike in Oak Bluffs on State Beach, who took the picture?
Oh, these are many of these pictures were contemporaneous. This one, my wife took this picture. This was, no, the other one, you saw me on that bike, that was a few years later, knowing to illustrate this. But an awful lot of those pictures were taken way back when of the stuff. I mean, those Polaroids, Bob Frankston, who had his Polaroids, that was the real attic and stuff like that. Some of it is just I remember and take it. I carry a camera and take pictures and stuff. You never know, the Lord works in wondrous, mysterious ways. I take a lot of my own pictures. I had somebody in the audience once who was a writer for popular science or something, but also a writer for popular photography. And he was going to do an article about executives who do their own photographs for their talks. As a photographer, as a child, you know, I got to live out a fantasy. I have a photograph, which I didn't show you, but a photograph that I took that's in Popular Photography magazine, you know. And how did it get there? Well, because of this, you know, and you never know. Videographer, I have a video that I had taken of me that's in the Triumph of the Nerds. I don't know how many of you have seen that PBS special, because we were into home video and recorded it, and it happened to have the right thing.
Fantastic. Let's give it up for
Thank
Dan.
you.
Great job.
Thank you.